All right, next question is from B.R. Duffy, who says this. Hi, Glenn. The situation in Venezuela. I remember you implying that the excuse his administration is using for military action there is disingenuous. In fact, I not only implied that, I actually said that in a show we devoted to this very topic, I think 2 or 3 days ago this week, about the obvious dangers of engineering regime change in Venezuela, which clearly is the purpose of what we're doing there. The question goes on, quote, if drugs are not the issue, and we just turned down an agreement with them for a large stake in their oil, mineral, and gold rights, along with them cutting ties with China and Russia, then what is going on? Do I have this right? Why are we in a military conflict with Venezuela? It's a good question. First of all, I would be skeptical about these reports, and they're emanating directly from Trump as well, that Maduro basically said, oh, anything you want, we'll give you to stay in power. Have all our oil, have all our minerals, whatever you want, just leave us alone. And Trump today, and I'm quoting him, he used a profanity to say it, said, Maduro gave us everything, he offered everything because, quote, he doesn't want to fuck with the United States. But Trump strongly implied that he rejected all those offers and he wants to take out Maduro, which was the policy of the first Trump administration. They just couldn't get it done. That was what led to the exit of John Bolton, was he promised Trump it could be done with relative ease, and it didn't happen, and Trump lost faith in Bolton. And now we're right back to that. I saw the leader of the Venezuelan opposition, who she just won the Nobel Peace Prize. She said a couple things today. One is she called Benjamin Netanyahu to make clear that she is a strong, close friend of an ally of Israel, which is what you would expect. This is a neoconservative policy to topple regimes we don't like under the guise of spreading democracy and freedom, liberating the people of other countries, all the things I thought the America First movement was anathema to doing. So she said that, but then she also said, if you bring democracy and freedom back to Venezuela, you're not going to just bring it back to Venezuela, you're going to bring it back to the whole region. You'll topple the regimes of Cuba and other repressive regimes in the Caribbean and Central America and South America, and freedom and democracy will spread everywhere throughout the region, which is exactly what neocons, of course, said in the build-up to the Iraq War, 2002, 2003, that if, and this is something Benjamin Netanyahu said, this is his main argument for trying to get the Congress to invade Iraq, which is he said, I can guarantee you that if you take out Saddam and a democracy flourishes there, it will spread, democracy will, to every country in the region. Obviously, that never happened. None of that came close to happening. The opposite happened. The United States has been trying to overthrow the government of Cuba for almost 70 years now. Our obsession with Cuba is what led to the Bay of Pigs disaster. It's what led to the Cuban Missile Crisis that came close to ending humanity as a species on this planet through nuclear apocalypse. This obsession with Cuba, why? It's a tiny little island. It's not a threat to the United States. Huge numbers of people came from Cuba to the United States. They exercise a lot of political power. They live in Miami. Marco Rubio's family is among them. And because they came from Cuba, they've always focused on Cuba, even though they're supposedly living in the United States as citizens of the United States. I grew up there. I grew up around them. I grew up in Miami, in South Florida. I know the Cuban community very well. In fact, a lot of them would come to the United States and live their whole lives here, and they would never learn English because they always thought they were just temporarily here until they were waiting for the United States to overthrow Castro, and then they were going to go back to Cuba. So why would they need to learn English? And the second, third generation Cubans have become more Americanized. They're sort of like Marco Rubio. They're higher, they go to college, they learn English, they become more Americanized. But still, their interest remains very much focused on the Caribbean, Central America, South America. They hated Hugo Chavez as an ally. They don't just hate the communist government of Cuba, they hate whoever is an ally of his. And Marco Rubio is somebody who, although he was born in the United States, his parents are immigrants who came from Cuba. They didn't flee Castro, by the way. They fled the U.S.-supported government of Batista, who Castro overthrew. That story has gotten a little bit blurred over the years. I believe that's true about Rubio. I might be thinking about Ted Cruz, but I'm pretty sure it's true of Marco Rubio. And a lot of people, it's just like Israel, a lot of people who are raised in the United States, but told to love Israel, to think about Israel, want to use the United States government and their U.S. citizenship to serve the interests of this foreign country that they've been taught to love. And the same is true for a lot of people who come from Cuba, who come from Venezuela, who come from Latin America. There's a huge Venezuelan and Cuban voting bloc in Florida now. And a lot of those people, it's just like those Iraqi exiles who were so eager to have the U.S. overthrow Saddam Hussein's regime so they could feel like they and people aligned with them got back into power in Iraq. They used the United States as their private militia. You can find all sorts of Iranian dissidents or exiles or immigrants who think the United States should overthrow the current government of Iran and reinstall the Shah and the Shah's son, the Pahlavi family, the royal family of Iran. There's all kinds of people with interest in other parts of the world, with other countries, who come to the United States and want to use the United States to advance the interest of these other countries. And of course, they can concoct reasons why it's somehow in the interest of the United States to do so. The reason that I say drugs are a pretext is because we've gone over these government reports several times now about where drugs come from that are entering the United States. And for many of the drugs that have been the topic of the most amount of concern and focus, that are killing the most Americans, like fentanyl or opioids in general, they don't come from Venezuela. Venezuela has basically no role in the flow of fentanyl or other opioids into the United States, heroin. And even with the drug that they're most associated with, which is cocaine, very few drugs emanate from Venezuela. Very few drugs that come to the United States emanate from Venezuela. It comes from Colombia, it comes from Mexico, it comes from China. And even if you decided, we have to start interdicting drugs from Venezuela, why do you have to blow up boats? Just yesterday, we blew up another boat. I think it was the 6th boat in the last 6 weeks that we were told has drugs on it and drug traffickers on it. There have been families, including Trinidadian families, who have come and said, my son was on one of these boats. He was nothing but a fisherman. And you can say, well, am I supposed to blindly believe that person or their family? No, but you're going to blindly believe the government when they say the people they're blowing up are drug traffickers coming to the United States with no evidence? But yesterday we blew one up. And apparently not everybody aboard was killed. There were 2 or 3 survivors, and American helicopters swept down and picked them up and now have them in custody. So why can't we just do that? Why can't we just interdict boats that we claim are coming to the United States to smuggle drugs, charge them with crimes, put them on trial in a court, show the evidence that they're guilty, and then imprison them? That's how civilized countries punish drug trafficking, punish crimes. You don't just go around blowing boats up. And you can say, it's expensive to put people on trial. Do you know how much more expensive it is to do what we're doing in Venezuela? We have this gigantic military deployment. All kinds of aircraft carriers and submarines and drones. I mean, just the entire array of American military assets surrounding Venezuela deployed in the Caribbean. And we have a covert CIA program operating in Venezuela to destabilize and then overthrow the Maduro government, which is obviously very, very expensive as well. I'm sure we're throwing cash around that country. We have $100 million or something reward for the capture of Maduro. And then if we do succeed in installing this woman as the president of Venezuela and her faction, we're going to fund them. We're going to give her all sorts of weapons, give her the guns to fight the people in Venezuela who are still loyal to Maduro. And then whatever instability is going to occur, and of course there's going to be instability from a regime change war, we're going to pay for all that as well. So whatever costs come from interdicting these boats and picking these people up and prosecuting them and putting them in prison is a tiny, minute fraction of whatever we're going to spend and already spending on what is obviously a regime change war. And the question is why? Why do people in Ohio, why do people in Arizona, why do people in Idaho, how are their lives bettered by changing the government of Venezuela or the government of Cuba? How are people in Missouri or in Georgia harmed by having this government instead of that one in Havana or Caracas or other places in the Caribbean or in Central America? Their lives are as affected by that as they are affected by who runs various provinces of eastern Ukraine, which is to say not at all. This is pure neoconservative policy being pushed by people who are both neocons like Marco Rubio, but also people who have a lot of loyalty and ancestry based in that region. They want Maduro gone for their own reasons. They want Castro gone for their own reasons, or Castro's descendants. And they use the United States to do it. And it's really, I find it, I guess, astonishing, even though maybe I shouldn't. But I've watched Americans now for 2.5 decades say, and not just leftists or liberals, but conservatives, MAGA, America First, all these political movements converging on this understanding that we have to stop fighting these endless wars. We have to stop pouring our resources into regime change operations in other countries and focus on our own country and our own communities and the people who live in them. Remember all that? And you look at the priorities of the Trump administration: bombing Yemen, bombing Iran, feeding Israel weapons and arms, threatening Hamas, we're going to go in and if they don't stop this or they don't stop that. Obsessed with the war in Ukraine and Russia. President Trump spoke with President Putin yesterday, met with President Zelensky today. Credit to him for trying to end the war. I believe he's trying to do that, but look at all the priorities. Now we're engaged in a major regime change operation in Venezuela. For what? Why? How does this align with any of the interests of the American people that Donald Trump and his supporters have vowed they're going to dedicate themselves to? There are agendas served by that. None involving the forgotten man, as Donald Trump called the people he claimed to want to represent. And all of that is true if this operation goes as perfectly as it could possibly go. But as Tulsi Gabbard told Fox News in 2019 when condemning the first Trump administration's desire to regime change Venezuela, it rarely, if ever, does go according to plan. And you end up producing all sorts of consequences you don't want and don't anticipate, getting dragged in so many other ways. And that's almost certainly what's going to happen here. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.